Hello Yu-Gi-Oh players and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0. So today I am bringing back my Tuesday deck reviews, and I figured I'd start with one that is very appropriate to the theme of Dark Armed Dragon Month, since not only does it include the mighty Dark Armed Dragon, but it can search it, and we'll get to that in a second. This is made by a subscriber named Brandymon, so I decided to call it Brandy Monarchs. For reasons that you will see in a moment. So let's get down to the deck. So first we have Double Collapse Serpent, then we have 1 BLS, 2 Cayuse, 2 Card Trooper, 1 Chaos Sorcerer, of course the Dark Armed Dragon, 1 Dark Grepher, triple Malicious, double Goblin Zombie, triple Maxi, double Mizuki, 1 Mobius, 1 Photon Thrasher, 2 Plague Spreader Zombie, 1 Ryza, 2 Raiden. That's the Light Sworn Tuner. He isn't out on DN because DN has this odd hatred for OCG cards in that they never put them up unless they know for sure that nobody is going to want to play with them, in which case they just flood the damn thing with it. Anyway, so I am proxying Raiden with Rosewary Revenge. He's a level 4 tuner, 1700. He's light, and he can mill 2 cards from your deck to the graveyard during your main phase. Which is very important to the deck. Then you've got triple Wyverburster and then double Zombie Master for your monster lineup. Then for your spells you have 1 Book of Moon, 1 Dark Hole, 2 Enemy Controller, 2 MST. I'm not sure why it always ends up on either side of Rhoda, whatever. Then we've got the Rhoda and the triple Return of the Monarchs, which is basically the center of this deck. For those of you guys who don't know what Return of the Monarchs does, it says you can't special summon from the extra deck, but when you tribute summon a monster, you can either add a 2400 1000 monster with a different name than the tribute summoned monster, or you can add a 2800 1000 monster with a different name from your deck to your hand, which can search out Dark Armed. You can only use its effect once per turn, but of course you run D3 in order to replace it in case of MST. And I'm just reading this to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so the focus of this deck appears to be to use your Wyverburster and your Collapse Serpent and the rest of your zombie engine in order to tribute for Monarchs, which can then search out Dark Armed Dragon, which then by means of graveyard control, whether it's Wyverburster or Mizuki or whatever, to make sure that you can put that Dark Armed on the board. The two things that I noticed right off the bat with this deck is first, 42 cards. Oh my goodness, I am so OCD about having exactly 40 cards in my decks, just because I have really bad luck and I don't like drawing into bad things, so I try to reduce the chance that I don't draw into the really good things that I need, so I almost never run more than 40 cards. The other thing I notice is that, speaking of inconsistency, this deck is nigh catastrophically inconsistent. And this really stems from the main engine, which is the Zombie and Malicious engine, which is the very first cut I'm going to make. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is because I have a certain kind of test for consistency, which is where I look at each card and I think, how many cards do I have to have available to me in order to make this combo live and in order for it to do me any good? Malicious is a great example of why this rule is important to think about. Because if you have a Malicious in your hand, in order to make it live, you have to have at least 2 more cards in your hand. You have to have a Monarch or a Plague Spreader to make it useful to you. Then you need of course, your Malicious, and then you need your Zombie Master or your Grepher in order to put it in the graveyard in order to get it working. There is the other side, which is the fact that you could potentially mill it with Raiden or with Card Trooper, which would be great, except then your Dark Grepher would be dead. Or you could end up milling multiples, or then you could draw into one. I just don't like Malicious unless I'm looking at a specific Destiny Hero engine in which I'm using my D draws and stuff like that, which is something that doesn't exactly cater to how this deck works. So my first cut is going to be the triple Malicious. The next cut, since Malicious is gone, is to take away Grepher, since its entire point was to put monsters in the graveyard. The next cut I want to make is actually to one of the Monarchs, which is Mobius. In my opinion, there isn't a whole lot that Mobius can do that an MST and another Monarch can't do. In a lot of situations, Mobius is going to be a lot less useful to you than any of the other Monarchs. Yes, he does give you that extra plus, but in all reality, with a Monarch deck, that isn't entirely necessary. Now, one of the reasons why I say that's true is because A, you just start off with a ton of spot removal, and B, Monarchs tend to be pretty low on firepower in the first place. So one of the things you want to do is focus in on monster removal, and Mobius doesn't do that so hot. So I'm actually going to cut the Mobius just because it has less synergy with the deck than some of the other Monarchs that we could be using. The final cuts that I want to make to this deck first are Rhoda, since without your Dark Grepher, this card, while it is good, and it's got some issues to work out, and there's the fact, first of all, that you're now only running 3 Warriors, which you run a charge of the Light Brigade even if you're only running 3 Light Sworns, but at the same time, there are other things that you could put in here, so I'm not actually going to cut that Rhoda now. I'll save that for later in case I think that I need to cut something else, or in order to cut it to make room. So the next thing I want to talk about is the Zombie Engine. Now, the Zombie Engine, while it does produce a lot of things I like, for instance, being able to search out Mizuki, which enables you to make some Plague Spreader plays with Collapse Serpent and Wyverburster. All in all, the only card that gives you any advantage out of the Zombie Engine is Mizuki. I really, really like Mizuki, and I actually spent about an hour today trying to work Mizuki into this deck somehow. I tried out Vampires, which works pretty well, except for the fact that Vampires really rely on being able to summon from the extra deck, which you can't do with Return of the Monarchs on the board. So I really wanted to work in Mizuki, and I just couldn't. While the Zombie Engine is good for just kind of going through your deck, it's good for deck thinning, it creates some combos. In all reality, it's inconsistent enough, and it's vulnerable enough that I actually really don't like it for really any deck, the exception being Vampires, but that's because Vampires can abuse Goblin, Zombie, and Mizuki to the point where they actually develop even more advantage than they did before. There are a lot of other cards that we can use, and I will get to that in a second. So I am taking out the double Mizuki, even though it pains me to do so because I like Mizuki so much, the double Zombie Master, the double Goblin Zombie, and the double Plague Spreader. So what this leaves us with is basically the core of the deck. The core, as far as the monsters go at least, the core of the deck is using your Collapse Serpents and your Wyverbursters in order to put Monarchs on the board, which can search for Dark Armed or other Monarchs, of course. You're missing a significant number of Monarchs, which I will address in a moment, but that's essentially what the focus of this deck really should be, is using Tribute Summons to search out other Monarchs to get Dark Armed, or to just put a ton of advantage and a ton of pressure on your opponent. In all reality, for now, what I'm going to do, there are a couple of cards that aren't necessary right now. I might bring them in later, but I'm going to tell you they are useful to the deck. It's just I want to cut them out right now for space in order to make sure, absolutely sure, that the most important focus of the deck is available. The first one I'm going to cut are the Chaos Monsters. What is the reason? Well, as Brandymon told me in one of the PMs, he's actually he's running the Collapse Serpent only at 2 because he's really low on light monsters in this deck, which means that he can't really afford to be using them up on the Chaos Monsters. While yes, the Chaos Monsters are extremely powerful, they go against the main win condition of the deck and the main focus. If you get them early game and you have to banish Collapse Serpent or Wyverburster fodder in order to put them on the board, that puts you in a really tight spot in case they ever get taken out. So I am taking out the Chaos Monsters for now. I may have to bring them in later, but we'll wait for then. The next thing I'm bringing out, I'm taking out is Photon Thrasher, and that's because there's a spell card that takes the place of Photon Thrasher in a lot of ways that I want to bring in a second. I may once again bring in Photon Thrasher later, since he does allow you to make more Monarch plays, but we'll get to that in a second. Then the next things I'm taking out are enemy controllers. In all reality, your field presence is so precious that you do not want to be tributing it. One of the reasons why this is so good in your Frog Monarch decks is because it allows you to, without any resistance, be able to take and tribute your opponent's monsters. But with a deck that doesn't have that free summon of the Treeborn from your graveyard, enemy controller can actually become really dead, or even if you use it, it can actually be counterproductive to your strategy. And then finally, as it appears that I'm going to have to take out Rhoda for now, but I'll come back to that in a while. Now what you're left with is kind of a shell of the former deck, but this is really what the deck needs to have in order to run. Now there are a couple things that I noticed were missing from the deck. The first thing, of course, being missing is your third Collapse Serpent, which I want to make room for and I want to cater to because it is really important. It adds advantage, it adds speed and consistency to the deck if you're running the playset of both of them, and there are ways of getting light monsters in the graveyard in order to make it work. So I'm going to put in the third Collapse Serpent. The second thing that I noticed was really missing from this deck is defensive plays. The thing about not running defensive plays is that while it does open up room for your deck, and if you're a really aggressive deck, then you can, if you have other monsters, that helps you to put the pressure on your opponent. But the problem with having a lack of defense is if your opponent realizes that you're not defending yourself, they are going to go serious business, no joke, no fear, balls to the wall on you, which is just about the worst thing that you could possibly have them do in a deck that really requires you to build up field presence and hold on to the life points you have. So one of the things I'm going to throw in here that was actually up there before is Triple Battle Fader. I may cut that down a little later, but it's very good for the Monarch engine, since it puts a tribute on the board, or a tribute material on the board. It sets you up for your next turn, and it just stops your opponent from OTKing you. I'm likely to cut this down to 2, but we'll put it at 3 for now and figure out what happens. Another thing that's going to be really important for this deck, especially since you're running the triple maxi and you're running that return of the Monarchs as well as your Collapse Servant, is Tragodia. Since Tragodia gains its attack points from the number of cards in your hand, and all of these cards in your deck reset themselves in your hand, this card could actually become an extremely powerful dark boss monster. Not to mention that it's dark for Dark Armed, and it is an OTK stopper. You can special summon it from your hand when your opponent attacks, and you can keep your opponent at bay for a turn, or just keep yourself from losing. So that's a really important thing to have in there. So the double Tragodia and triple Battle Fader. Once again, I might take out the third Battle Fader. But the double Tragodia is absolutely integral to any Monarch deck. I would run Gores, except for the fact that this card is really important. So that is the defensive lineup that you're going to end up with for this deck. The final thing, as far as monster lineup goes, that this deck is missing is actually mildly important, which is the fact that it is a Monarch deck. It kind of needs Monarchs, in my opinion. If you're only running 3, before it was running 4, but still, that's definitely not enough in order to cater to the strategy of Return of the Monarchs. One thing you can do in order to make this deck play smoother, first of all, let's see. First of all is add the third Caius. Caius is the most important monarch. He has the best effect, and he's instant spot removal. He's a dark for dark armed, and for Wyver Burster. So he's your most important monarch. I would run 3 of him. The other thing that you can do in this deck, in order to make your Collapse Serpent more alive, if you put it on the board, is you can run Zaborg. Now, Zaborg is generally left out because he's stopped by things like Stardust and Dragasack, but in a deck like this, you can actually use him, especially in this format, to take out a lot of problem cards for the deck, and he's just a really good all-around card to have available. I'd run 1 or 2 of him. I'll start with 2. He does only take out monsters on the board, which tends to be kind of disadvantageous, but I like the fact that he speeds up those light and dark plays. Other than that, I wouldn't add another Ryza, just because Ryza doesn't really get rid of a lot of problem cards in this format. He is a little better against Dragasack, but a lot of the time you're going to see monsters other than Dragasack hit the board. And once again, he is searchable with Return of the Monarchs, so if you do end up searching with Zaborg, or tribute summoning Zaborg, you're going to be in a much better place anyway. The next monster that isn't actually a Monarch, but acts like a Monarch, particularly for this deck's purposes, is Vanity's Fiend. I'm going to put in 2, even though I'm likely to take out the second one later. But Vanity's Fiend stops players from special summoning monsters, which in this format is spectacularly good, especially if you can use him and not lose advantage. One of the great things about this deck is it really does replenish all your advantage whenever you use it. So if you have the Return of the Monarchs on the board, and you have a Collapse Serpent or a Wyver Burster play available to you, you can tribute it for the Vanity's Fiend, which then allows you to get back, the counterpart of the monster you tributed for it, and then you can add extra plays for later, like Return of the Monarchs, or with Return of the Monarchs, like a Caius or something. So that is a really important card to taking on this format, especially for a Monarch deck. So now you have a load of boss monsters and a bunch of defensive cards, and you're basically set up for your monster lineup. The next card I want to use is actually a spell card that I'm amazed was not in the original version, which is Soul Exchange. One of the ways that Monarch decks can really improve their consistency is with a 1-card spell card that can take out an opponent's card in order to allow you to tribute for a Monarch, and this card is just spectacular, this format. It takes away that Stardust, it takes away Dragasack, and it really speeds up the plays for this Monarch deck. You can tribute your opponent's monster to summon Vanity's Fiend, which if you're playing against dragons can be a game ender, even at the very beginning. This card improves your consistency. It allows you to set up more Wyver Burster Collapse Serpent plays by, putting that Caius or that Zaborg on the board. And it is just generally a pretty darn spectacular card. So now you've got a lot of consistency ready to go. You've got boss monsters, you've got spot removal, and now all I'd like to do is just add a few more cards that can aid in the deck's workings. The first one is Zephyros the Elite, the Black Wing monster. Since it can bounce back your Return of the Monarchs to your hand in order to summon itself, which you can then use, you can tribute it for Caius or Vanity's Fiend or Ryza or Zaborg. You can even bounce back a Monarch that you've already used in order to reuse it. Zephyros is a really powerful card, especially in a deck that has milling power, like a deck that has Raiden and Card Trooper in it. So Zephyros is a really powerful choice for this deck. It improves consistency, it recycles plays, not to mention it's a dark monster to cater to Dark Armed. And the final 2 cards I would like to add, and I am really deciding if this is absolutely necessary right now, is I think I would like to add 2 Effect Failers. The reason being, it's a light monster, which allows you to start getting your Collapse Serpent plays going earlier. It stops your opponent's monsters, and having your opponent Big Eye like a Dark Armed or a Vanity's Fiend, if somehow they manage to stop Vanity's Fiend for the turn, or something like that, you get the idea. Valor is a really important card to this deck, and it stops your opponent's plays in the same kind of way that Max C does. I do like the double Valor, triple Max C, as I discussed in one of my previous videos, because you can draw into Valor with Max C. The other way around isn't quite true, so Max C tends to get a little less cloggy than Valor. So, tentatively, this is what I think the deck looks like at its most optimum. You can put those Battle Faders on, or Tragodias on the board in order to defend yourself. They, in turn, set up for your Wyverburster plays, and they also set up for your Caiuses, your Zaborgs, your Vanity's Fiend, and your Ryza. They're also Dark Monsters, which caters to Dark Armed Dragon. Then you've got your Soul Exchanges, which also allow you to get early Monarch plays on the board. Later in the game, you also have your Ride-ins, which allow you to go for level 8 Synchro plays with your Collapsed Serpent and Wyverburster, in case you've already been using your Battle Faders and Tragodias and Soul Exchanges in order to summon your Monarchs. You've got your Zephyros, which creates a backup play, an extra plus that doesn't really have much risk to it, that you can get with Return of the Monarchs, and it allows you to reuse your Monarch cards. Then you've got Card Trooper to set up plays with Zephyros, and by putting cards in the grave like Zaborg or your Collapsed Serpents or Wyverbursters in order to set up for more Collapsed Serpent Wyverburster plays, and it also sets up for Dark Armed. Then you have your Double Valor in order to stop plays, load up the grave for Wyverburster, or rather Collapsed Serpent, sorry about that. You can also synchro it with other monsters if, of course, you don't have Return of the Monarchs on the board. You have your triple Maxi once again to stop plays and to add advantage, which is super helpful for Trag. It helps you to draw into Battle Fader if your opponent's trying to OTK you. Then you have of course, your Ryza, your Monarchs, which can take out cards on your opponent's side of the field. You've got your Ride-ins for those synchro plays, and then you've got all your back row in order to make the deck work properly. I might take out the Book of Moon for an extra MST now that you have enough of defensive plays, but that's really down to player preference. So that is what this deck looks like, having spent a ton of your time workshopping it. I hope you guys like this version of the deck. I didn't work with the extra deck much, but I'm sure that you guys can imagine what you would do with it. Meanwhile, thank you guys for watching. I'm your host, the RJB0. If you liked this video, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why. And then subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! Videos. Thank you guys for watching Yu-Gi-Oh! and Business Casual. I got a jet.